What is up, YouTube? We are back on this project we're calling Frankenstroke. Basically building a truck from a rolling chassis and a bunch of parts. If that's something that you're interested in, I'll leave a card here in the upper right hand corner for a playlist that you can watch the process and follow along. But one of the next steps in this process is going to be to replace these rear spring hangers. As you can see, that one is done. It is shot. It is completely broken, front and back, and it's just hanging by that little piece right there. That and the end of the bolt are the only thing that are holding this corner of the truck up. So we've got some new spring hangers here that we're going to go ahead and install. I found a set that came complete with the spring shackle. I ordered those from Rock Auto. I'll show you the part number for those. This is an SKP part, and that is the number. So as I was looking at these, Dorman makes one. It was, I think, $45 a side for just the hanger without the shackle. These SKP kits were $47 with the shackle and the bolt. So it was kind of a no-brainer. One of the things that you'll see that we're going to fight against is getting these bolts out of the bushing that goes through the spring. So the more we can eliminate that as something that we've got to deal with, the better. And doing it this way, we don't have to worry about removing this one. We just got to get this one out. So I've already got my cord out here. I've got my air hose. I got my little AV cart turned mobile tool cart. I wanted to bring you in here, and I'm going to show you 3 different ways to remove the rivets that attach that bracket to the frame. All right, these are not bolts. These are not carriage bolts. There's no nut on the inside. It's a rivet. It's riveted together. So these have got to come off. Now, admittedly, this is kind of cheating. There's no bed on this truck. So we've got all the access that we need to be able to do this. But for purposes of filming, it would be really tough to try and show you what to do with the bed in place. And there's no bed on this truck right now, so this is the time to do this. If you've ever got your bed off for any reason, check those spring hangers. If they look bad, man, that is the time to do them. Spend the $90 or $100 to get the parts and just get it done while it's easy. It's a lot easier to do it this way than it is with the bed in place, because we've got all the access we need. So I'm going to show you 3 different ways to remove these rivets. One tool that you definitely will need is a grinder. You're just going to need to get a grinder. If you don't have a grinder, go get one. I tend to err on the side of buying the highest quality tools that I can afford at the time. And for you, if that's going to Harbor Freight and buying the bottom of the line grinder offering for $20 or $25, go get one. You will not regret it. It'll pay for itself in the course of this job, and it'll pay for itself over and over again as you use it. They're a very, very useful tool for cutting and removing metal. So I will show you 3 different ways to remove those, but we're going to need a grinder for all 3. So to get started here, I'm going to go ahead and start the time lapse, and we'll get this thing jacked up off the ground. I'm going to block it under the frame, and then I'll put my jack underneath the axle to support it as well, just so we don't have any surprises as things start to come apart. But obviously we've got to support it from the frame, because these shackles are what tie the frame and the axle together. So to support it from the axle doesn't do us any good. So we'll get it jacked up, get it supported here, and then we'll get into how we remove these things. Let's get to work. right, well, I've got it jacked up and supported. That's a big heavy bumper, so as little weight as there is to this truck right now with no transmission or transfer case or engine in it, supporting it off that bumper is fine. If it was a lot heavier and had the bed and everything on there, I'd probably want to have the support right up here under the frame. But for right now, this will work. Again, I am supporting the axle itself with my jack. You can see that there. And that's just to keep pressure off of these brackets and bolts and things as we're kind of working our way through this process. So at this point, believe it or not, this guy's not going to fight at all. And the one on the other side is a little stiffer than that, but it has moved as well. Sometimes these things can be a real booger, and if the old BFH isn't able to break them free here, what I would recommend is that you just cut here and here on your shackle, since you're going to replace those anyway, right? Or at least here. Get this piece out of the way, and then drill this out and replace that bushing. There's another video that I'll link to here with the card that goes through the steps of how to replace spring eye bushings, and it's pretty much the same for these here on the rear end as it is for the ones that I showed there on the front end. You get in here and drill the rubber out with a drill bit, knock everything apart. But in order to get any clearance here, we've got to get this spring eye either up above the frame or down below. And in order to do that, we've really got to kind of have these shackles out of the way. So there's a couple of things you could do to do that. One would be to remove this bolt, and the shackle would be free and would float with the spring. Since we're just going to get rid of these, I'm just going to go ahead and cut these off. I'm going to go ahead and cut them with a cutting wheel in my grinder here. So a word of note about grinders, be careful. I think if you watch Roadkill, they probably call that the death wheel. And there's good reason for that. I've had these things shatter while they're spinning about 13,000 RPMs and come apart and fly everywhere. Just really be careful. Wear your protective equipment. I wear my glasses. My prescription glasses are polycarbonate, so they kind of count as my eye protection. These things are awfully noisy as well, so I tend to throw a pair of earplugs in. And for some reason here, I must be getting old, but I've developed a real sensitivity to the dust created by cutting with a grinding wheel. I don't know if it's the aluminum oxide of that cutting wheel, or if it's the rust and the metal in the air that I end up sucking up into my sinuses, but I can feel it for 2 or 3 days after I use one of these every single time. So I just wear a dust mask, just a simple respirator, and that keeps me nice and clear, or at least as much as normal. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and cut this side apart. Then we'll lower or raise, maybe just raise, that axle so that we can get these bolts out. And then we'll get into the details of how to remove the rivets themselves. Well, this side was easy. That side, even though the bolt was loose, still put up a fight. You can see how these things just kind of rust into place. So if that's yours, just keep working it back and forth. You know, use all the tricks, twist on that thing, keep tapping it back and forth. You might have seen me trying to back this side of the spring up as I'm hitting the other side to try and provide a little bit of ballast. You know, use whatever you can. I got nuts done. I'll have to find another one. But I tend to put the nut back on when I'm going to beat on something like that, just so I don't chew up the end of the bolt. See, that bolt is still in pretty good shape. If you chew that end of the bolt up, then you've got to clean it up with a grinder or dress it up so that you can get the nut started, get to some fresh threads there. So I'm sure I've got another nut like that laying around here with all the junk that I've got around here from these trucks. But that's it for that stage of the thing. I guess the next step is for us to go ahead and take a couple of these rivets off. So I will show you 3 different methods to do that, starting with the one that requires the fewest fancy tools. Alright, so the first method, and if you have a bed on your truck and space is tight, this might be the only method that you can use. The first method is just to cut the face of this rivet off with your grinder. Just cut it off flush with the metal. You can dig into this metal with the grinder all you want. That'll slow you down some, but since we're not saving that piece anyway, it doesn't really matter. But if you cut that off flush, then you can get onto the center of the rivet with a punch and drive it in through the frame. So that's the first one that we'll show here. I'm just going to use a cutting wheel. You can also just use a regular grinding wheel, especially if angles are tough and you can't get on there. A grinding wheel sometimes will take a little longer, but it'll do a better job for you. I've got a cutting wheel in my grinder right now, so that's what I'm going to use because I've got the clearance to do so. So let's get that first one taken care of. We'll demonstrate that first method. Alright, one down. All we used for that one was our grinder, a big hammer, and a flat-headed punch. You don't want a center punch with a point on it. That'll actually swell the tip of that rivet and you won't be able to drive it out. It'll actually tighten it in the hole. So use a flat pointed punch and you can do it that way. Now the next 2 methods both involve cutting the heads off of those rivets using a chisel of some sort. And I find that it cuts a lot easier if I just take my grinder and I grind across into the front of each rivet. So I'm going to go ahead and do that on all 3 of these that remain, and then I'll show you the 2 different methods of cutting those off. Alright, so the first method that I'll show you here is just using a big cold chisel. This is a chisel that I picked up at a auction or a yard sale or a flea market or something. I don't even remember. I think it was an auction. And essentially what you want to do is get right into the corner between the rivet and the backing material with the back face of the chisel flat, and then just go to town with a great big hammer. Okay, and it'll actually cut that rivet and those little pieces will come off. Now you can see on some of these I had a hard time getting across cut into them just because of the angles that I've got to work at here. So sometimes that's a challenge. Kind of take that into consideration before you make your first cut. Try to get two angles that are close to 90 degrees apart so that you've got smaller pieces to try and cut out later. But let's go ahead and cut that first rivet out using our cold chisel and a hammer. Alright, I've brought you in close here so that you can see what we're doing. Got my gloves back on because I do tend to get distracted and hit my hands while I'm doing this. See there? Got that head cut off. And now we can do the same thing as we did before with our punch and drive that rivet out. I won't do that right now just in the sake of time and because my camera is in the way. Alright, so we've got that guy out. You can see I touched the frame there just a little bit with that grinder. It's not much, it just shined it up in one little spot. Made a clean spot. So now that I've got the head cut off, I can do the same thing with my punch and drive that rivet out through. If that gives you trouble, go ahead and do all four of them and then remove the bracket and then work on the heads of those rivets. With the bracket out of the way, you can get to them and they protrude from the frame, so you can actually just whack them with a hammer to get them started, and then once they're moving it's a lot easier to finish them up with the punch. So on these other two, I'm going to go ahead and show you a method that involves the use of an air hammer. I picked this air hammer up from Facebook Marketplace. Believe it or not, it is a snap-on. That's one of, I think, two snap-on tools that I own. The other one is also an air tool. But I like air tools because air tools aren't expensive in general compared to battery tools and even hand tools. Sometimes air tools are not terribly expensive, at least they aren't around here. So if you can afford it, get yourself a decent sized air compressor to get you started, and then add air tools as you can afford to do so. They really are a great tool to have in your repertoire. So what we're going to do on this one is we'll change this punch tip out to a chisel tip, and we're going to do the same thing. I'll just use the air chisel to cut the heads off of those rivets. Makes short work of it, but again, not everybody has an air chisel, so I wanted to demonstrate a couple different methods here. that, it even lines up. All right, good. They're in good shape. Now the shackle. This guy actually comes with a new spring bushing. See that? And a bolt. Don't know that we're going to need the bushing, but we'll use the bolt. Yes, we will. Make sure we're going to put this on here, right? The open side of the shackle goes towards the back, so it goes like that. That bolt won't go in that way, so I guess it goes this way. Yeah, of course it does, because the other one was hung up on the tip of the bolt, or it was through the nut. Like that. Pretty good shape. All right, so we've got the spring hanger on this side. We've got the shackle hanging from the spring. And I think we're going to go ahead and put the spring hanger in place on the other side as well before we complete this side. The reason for that being, I've got to drop that axle in order to line that bolt up, and I don't want to pull that spring down into the way for me to remove the other shackle. or I'm sorry, the other hanger. So removing that other hanger is just a repeat of the process on this side. Really no difference there. You know, get your 4 rivets out, take that hanger out, and then put the new one into place. And once I get that done, I'll bring you back in here. We'll line this thing up and torque the bolts down. Alright, so we've got the hanger in place on the driver's side here as well as the passenger side. And now we can go ahead and hopefully line this thing up by dropping the axle. So I'll go ahead and drop the jack. See if we've got enough travel. Looks like it's going to be close. Yeah, maybe not. So, alright, well, looks like the other side might make it. Oh, I think we're okay. I think we're in pretty good shape here. It's tough to do with one hand. Alright, I'm going to switch cameras here. What we're going to do is go ahead and put the bolt in here, and then that gets torqued to 185 foot-pounds, or 3 ugga-duggas of a 1/2-inch drive gun. Seriously tight. That's how tight those get. Good luck breaking those off, so tighten them as much as you can. 185 is the technical spec, though. Alright, so this side is good. However, I want to get the other side put together and get it down and hanging on those shackles before I torque those bolts down. It is important that those things are in the right position before we apply torque to them, because if not, it's going to try and bind in there on that steel sleeve. So we want everything to be kind of at ride height before we torque that. So let me go ahead and get the other side lined up and the bolt put in, and then we'll go ahead and take it off the jack. Alright, so we've got all the blocks pulled out. We've got the wheels resting on the ground. We've got the frame hanging by the shackles. So that's about how things need to be aligned at ride height. So with that, we can go ahead and torque both of those bolts to 185 foot-pounds. Alright guys, well there we go. Everything is torqued up and tight and hanging as it should be. And that should have us good to go with those shackles and hangers for quite a few years to come. So hopefully that gives you some options as you decide how to go about taking care of this issue on your own truck. If you enjoy these OBS trucks or these how-tos, and you're into kind of these 7.3 Power Strokes or these old body style Fords, do us a favor and give the channel a subscription. We're in the middle of a project here, as you can see, and there's much more to come in the next installment of these videos. Thanks for watching, and hey, get out there and get to work.